this is a really big topic here, and it might seem a little bit broad. Essentially, what I want to share with you guys today is some insights that I've found over the past few years of actually building multiple different businesses based off of design. So I'll give you a quick little background about me and kind of some of the lessons that I've learned along the way. So when I was 14, I actually started by entering design contests online. Now, if you look closely here, you'll see that I entered 130 contests, but I only won 8 of them. Now, the maths on that isn't very good. And if you do it, you'll realize that I was working for free most of the time. Now, that's not super great, and I wouldn't really recommend it for any designer. And I think design contests in general aren't super ethical towards designers because it becomes a very competitive landscape and it becomes a bit of a sweatshop in terms of design. But as a beginner, as quite a young designer, it actually taught me a ton of lessons. In particular, it taught me that knowing how to design and being a designer are two completely different things. Knowing how to design is working with colors, typography, knowing how to deal with the layout, how to deal with responsiveness. It's the actual craft, right? But then being a designer is things like how to communicate with clients, how to present your work, how to pitch yourself, how to price, how to manage yourself or a team of people, how to work with other people. There's actually these soft skills that we develop as designers over time that are actually really important to master. And I think doing online design contests was a great way for me to kind of understand the two differences and realize, hey, I can design stuff, I'm getting better at that, but knowing how to be a designer is such a fundamental trait that isn't necessarily, say, taught. But as time goes on, I kind of build a lot more stuff, and basically, as a freelance designer, any sort of job that we can do as a graphic designer, I've probably done it for a client at some point, whether it be websites, animations, product design, illustrations, or basically anything in between, branding, you name it. I've probably done it for whether it be a high budget or a low budget. I definitely was in my freelance era here and did a ton of different stuff. But the main thing that I learned here is that you don't want to trade your time for pixels, and you actually want to exchange money for strategy. So what I mean by this is it's one thing to say, hey, I'm going to design you a new website. And you go, that's going to cost you $5,000 because I'm going to spend 50 hours on it. That's great. But when we kind of get into this mindset that we want to trade our time for the doing of the things, the actual execution, you actually become less valuable. Because as designers, our skill set is actually what's in here, what's in our head. And if we can figure out that creative knowledge that we have, and if you can figure out how to output that in written word or be able to communicate that, your value goes up. And I think especially as AI fast tracks our workflows, we've already had a great bunch of different talks around how we can actually utilize AI and GPT. Like Nandy mentioned just before, we can create code components or custom libraries using just a little bit of code and GPT. So this idea that AI is fast tracking our workflows and doing a lot of the execution for us, really as designers, if we want to stay ahead, what's up in our brain is actually the value. So if we can figure out how we can actually take that value and that knowledge that we have and our creative ideas, as wild as they might be, and be able to make that the product that we sell, that is way more valuable and way more timeless than, say, pushing pixels on the screen. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that you're never going to jump in Figma or Framer again. That's not it at all. But kind of starting with this mindset that, hey, I'm going to provide you with strategy. I'm going to provide you with concepts, and those concepts aren't me pitching you. That's actually part of the creative process of working with me. That's a fundamental change. And if you can master that, you're really going to set yourself up over these next, say, 10 years as AI starts to evolve this industry. Now, the other thing I started doing when I was, 17, 18, 19 years old was actually starting to create a bit of content online. Now, I'm sure that some of you here may or may not be familiar with this, but design carousels were a huge thing back in 2019, 2020, 2021. And it got very oversaturated very quickly on Instagram. And shamelessly, we were one of those people who were doing that. We're actually pretty early to do this. And essentially, I just started creating carousels every single day, teaching people how to not design, but be designers. As you can see, we grew this like global community of designers. And through this process of launching Pitchproof here, we actually created the first Frontrow conference, which at the time was the world's first online design conference back in 2019. Yes, pre-pandemic, which is just crazy to think about. And that was such like a surreal experience because we built this like really strong community of people through online content. And kind of doing that venture, it taught me a lot compared to just like working with clients in a small sort of like, instead of working with just like 4 or 5 clients, suddenly I was talking to 50,000 people. So like the way I was trying to communicate had to change. So the big lesson that I took from this was the best way to sell is not to sell. Now, that sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but let me explain. You see, running this account here, you notice that what I took away was by providing value, by providing education, by actually giving something without selling or asking. By the time I wanted to sell something or by the time I wanted to ask something, people were much more willing to listen. And essentially what this strategy does by not selling and just giving value, you're actually accelerating the time it takes for someone's trust to be earned with you. Essentially, when we look at content and some of the best content creators out there, all they're doing is building a relationship with you. And building content is just building relationships at scale. Instead of doing it one-on-one or in a personalized way, we're trying to talk to the mass. And the more and more value and educational content that I was putting out on this account, the higher my trust got. So even doing events like this where it was completely free and me being able to like talk to you, now obviously I can't have a proper conversation with you, but you're starting to get to know me. Your trust is starting to lift a little bit more and more with me every time you see me and every time I give content without actually asking something for return. And then when I want to go ask for something, whether I want to sell you a product or whether I just want you to join a really cool event, you're much more willing to actually listen and engage with that because we have that relationship built already. And this fundamental process of not selling can be applied to your freelance projects or even just working in-house as a designer and just kind of being more collaborative and not trying to, get ahead of everyone else for your own personal gain. So my fourth lesson that I want to share with you is it's better to have 100 people love you than 100,000 people kinda sorta like you. So at its peak, I think my Instagram account got up to 90,000 followers. Now that's like a huge number, right? Like that's massive. That fills stadiums. But what I kind of found over time was to build something sustainable, you need people not just to follow you because it's kind of cool and kind of trendy or whatever. You need them to really basically just fall in love with you. And there's this really great concept of 1,000 true fans, where if you want to build a 6-figure business, all you need is 1,000 true fans. Essentially 1,000 people who will pay you, say, $100 a year to, do some sort of service for you. Now, whether that be 1,000 people, whether it be 100 people who are paying you $1,000 a year, essentially this concept is if you can get it's so much easier to get 1,000 people to love you and love your products and what you're building. And then you kind of find that the rest of the people will kind of just come, and these core 1,000 people will be your best advocates for whatever you're trying to build, whether they be your clients or your customers. So as time goes on, I graduate high school and I, go, okay, this freelancing thing's cool and whatnot, but I actually think I need to make some serious and sustainable money. So I actually started working full time at a company called Black Magic Design. They do a bunch of like camera gear and video gear here in Melbourne and for like Hollywood films and stuff like that. And I started working for them at the start of 2020. And I'm sure you can guess what happened. The world shut down. Everyone went remote, and since I was technically just contracting for them full time, they decided to kind of lay off all their contractors. Now, this is one of those moments where it's like fight or flight, right? And you kind of don't have an option when, your full-time job is kind of taken away from you so quickly just after 3 months. And as the world kind of shut down, I realized I was actually really fortunate because I was creating content and I was still doing a bit of freelance, and I had other sort of like revenue sources I could rely on. So really here, the big takeaway is to always milk 2 cows, right? You always want multiple revenue sources, especially as creators, because whether you're freelancing, even if you're working full time and you're making good money, like that can disappear tomorrow. So having another revenue source that you're starting to build up just over time, and it doesn't have to be anything like insane. Like if you can get something to $1,000 a month and you've also got your full-time job there, and then say for whatever reason, touch wood, that your full-time job goes away, at least you've got something that's generating you a little bit of income, and it's almost like an emergency bucket for you in that situation. Or, you might be trying to build some sort of side hustle, and over time that overtakes your full-time income, and you might be able to jump full-time to that. But again, you want to make sure you're diversifying your income, so you've essentially got yourself an emergency bucket for rare situations. So as time goes on, I was doing a bit more content, and I actually started to build another startup, which was called Storytell. And the whole concept with Storytell was, we were running a few more of these Frontrow conferences, and we were really enjoying it, kind of like doing these virtual online events. And essentially what Storytell was made to do was to be the software for these virtual events that we wanted to build. And our whole thing was like, okay, how do we kind of like build these really cool interactive experiences like we do here with high production, but wrap that in software, because we knew there was a ton of different challenges that we faced every single time that we did these. And essentially the product we came up with was like Google Slides or Figma Slides meet Zoom or Miro or Google Meet, right? It was kind of like this hybrid of a video meeting plus a presentation tool. And we did like the real startup-y thing. We tried to like raise money. We tried to, go find some really early customers. We did like an MVP. Like it felt like we were building a startup from nothing. And really the big lesson that I learned here from doing all these pitches to customers, investors, all these different type of people, is that your value is not based on the work that you do, but the story you tell. So what was really interesting going into these pitch meetings, and we had a bunch of different pivots. We started in virtual events, and then we went to like bit more workshops, and then to just plain old video meetings. And the conversation differed depending on that narrative that I was telling and the story that I was telling, and essentially that pitch deck in verbal format. And when I relate this back to design, it's exactly true. Like I look back, say 5 years ago, or even just 2 years ago at my design work, and I go, okay, it's improved, but it hasn't improved massively. It's definitely improved by 5-10%, but it's not jumping year over year over year now. Like it's just slight improvements. But I look at like, say, what I've been able to charge or the type of clients I've been trying to get, and that's completely different to just a few years ago. And I think the big difference here is the story that I'm communicating, the way I'm positioning myself, the way I'm talking about the work, how I'm having conversations in a different way. And I think as designers, we get very trapped into going, oh, my work's good. I do pretty website designs. I am very good at typography, or I'm very strong at animation and effects. And that's really cool. But when you can talk a different language, potentially a language that seems a little bit more higher value to a customer or a client, you actually get perceived as higher value. Therefore, you can make more money, essentially. Now, the other lesson that I learned kind of growing our Storytell startup was to become an experienced designer. So again, like I mentioned, Storytell was around kind of like combining video meetings with Google slide presentations. And really what we found at the core of that was experience was the big driver. Again, Frontrow being an example, right? We don't want this to just be some sort of like webinar styled Zoom call where everyone just kind of jumps in and we're all just using our webcams and stuff. That feels very like pandemic days, right? And ever since, or even before the pandemic, we've always gone over and beyond with production, and we spend a lot of time and money doing it. That's because we really care about the experience, and we know that at the core, we need to design a really great experience for people to be engaged with what we're doing. So really the thing that we kind of took away from Storyteller here is that there's this new generation of designers starting to come up, which is experienced designers. And that isn't UI or UX designers, because I know that can sometimes kind of come under experienced designers. When I talk about experience design or experience creation, we're essentially talking about that whole process and every touch point that someone has with a brand, a website, a platform, or whatever it is, having someone come in and actually be the designer for that whole experience. Again, like obviously Frontrow is built for designers. I'm a designer, but like there's so many different elements with this Frontrow conference that we're putting on that is not traditionally design, but it is still designed. It's just not, Figma designed. So a really great example of this is Airbnb. There we go. Perfect. So what I love about Airbnb, they're super great storytellers, and you can probably tell that through some of their content and video ads and things like that. But I remember the founder, Brian Chesky, in an interview mentioning this, where they actually hired a storyboard artist from Disney to come over to Airbnb and to essentially draw out each milestone of the Airbnb journey. So when they sign up, when they decide to book a house, when they meet the guests for the first time, their first night, their checkout experience. And they, as you can see on the screen, they designed all of these moments and they had an artist draw them up. Because what the artist could do from Disney is kind of dictate that story and put it into a visual language. And then from this, what Airbnb did, which was really clever, is they took each one of these moments and they went, okay, these are the key things that we want to focus on. Let's get rid of the fluff, right? They knew the 8 to 10 moments that really mattered to their customers. And then they focused in on those moments and made them the best experience they could possibly be. So that's why when you check into an Airbnb, there's a whole experience for that. When you check out of an Airbnb, there's a whole experience for that. And I think we can apply this to whatever product or whatever project you're working on. Draw a storyboard, right? Figure out what is the most simplified version of that experience that you're trying to create. And then take every storyboard or every picture in that storyboard and make that the best experience possible. Now, lesson number 8, which again was kind of off the back of all this content and products that we were building, was that software needs personality. Now, I'm sure we can all kind of feel this, especially with AI coming in even more. But I think over time, what's happened with software is it's become very minimal, right? We want things to happen in the least amount of steps. So it's become very automated. It's become very pragmatic. And, obviously minimalism in software is such a big thing. We want it to be as easy for a user to do what they want to do. And AI is obviously a big evolution of that, where we need to come back to Generation Clippy. Maybe not that far, but again, like pretty far, where we actually want to bring in, what was I saying? We actually want to bring in some more personality. Now, the use case I want to share with you here is Duo. So essentially, Duolingo is this tool that lets you kind of learn languages on your phone, and they're mighty successful. But you'll kind of notice that they've got this little character, right, which is called Duo, and it's kind of like the mascot of their brand. Now, recently they put out this post on Twitter and everywhere on their socials, which I thought was just like entertaining. I just want to quickly read it to you. It is with our heavy hearts that we inform you that Duo, formerly known as the Duolingo Owl, is dead. Authorities are currently investigating his cause of death, and we are cooperating fully. To be honest, he probably died waiting for you to do your lesson, but we do what we know. We're aware he had many enemies, and we kindly ask that you refrain from sharing why you hate him in the comments. If you feel inclined to share, please also include your credit card number so we can automatically sign you up for Duolingo Max in his memory. We appreciate you respecting Dua Lipa's privacy at this time. Now, as a brand that has a lot of presence and a lot of character around this character within their brands, this is super strong. And it created this like real viral moment for them. They even like updated their app icon and all their social media icons with this like dead looking bird, which is hilarious. And all these different news articles started to chat to them. And it was like this really great, like just like fun moment in time. And all these other brands were starting to like interact with this post. And again, like this is super recent. This is like a week ago. So you can go online and actually just check some of this out for yourself. But if we take Duolingo as a use case, what they did really, really well is they actually created this personality within their brands, and they got people to care about this mascot, which was the hero of the brand. And at the end of the day, they use that for marketing in a fun and clever way. Now, let's talk a little bit about Framer. So Framer is something that I've been using for about 18 months now. And to give you a little bit of background to doing some of the freelance stuff over this long period of time now, I was using tools like Webflow to kind of build no-code websites for Framer. And then I discovered, to build no-code websites for clients. Then I discovered Framer, and it felt like a bit of an unlock for me. Now, learning from before, knowing that the best way to sell is to not sell, I was starting to play around with Framer, and I built this landing page because I started to see all this hype online around how you could like sell your landing page templates. I'm like, oh, that might be something interesting that I could try. And to be honest, it was like really intuitive to like build that landing page coming from both Figma and Webflow, kind of merging those skill sets that I had to build something in Framer was just really easy. But I was going to sell a template for $20 or so. And I said, you know what? Let's just put it on Twitter for free. Let's just not sell. And something really interesting happened. It kind of got a little bit of virality, just, a few hundred likes or whatever and comments, but people really liked this content. So I kept sharing it. And then suddenly I could like build all these different websites using Framer. And essentially what I started to become known for was this guy who could design, develop, and publish with speed, right? So really the key takeaway here was full stack design is a superpower. And I think as web designers specifically, the fact that we can now own that whole process end to end is crazy, right? A client can come to you or a customer can come to you and you can execute that whole scope of work. You can control that whole experience and design it in a way that feels really polished for that customer. So you can design the website, you can build it, and then you can publish it and deal with the content and changes and just own that whole process end to end. And to do with that with no code is obviously a way to speed up your workflow. Here's just a great example of me building in Framer. It's just a really cool sort of website. As you can tell, if you haven't signed up for Framer already, it kind of feels like Figma, right? It's kind of got that freeform canvas and you can just drag and drop things. I even released a course on Framer just a couple of months after creating all this content, and that started to generate a fair bit of hype. I started to work with Framer directly as well. So we actually created some of the first videos on Framer Academy, teaching people the fundamentals of Framer and say the CMS. But I think the really powerful thing here is designers are becoming developers and marketers are becoming publishers. Now, I think it's very easy for us to kind of get caught in this, and I'm sure you've heard this a bunch of different times for using no-code tools to build websites. Obviously, we can do things that we used to have to pay developers for, often very expensive because it's quite a time-consuming and technical process to build a website. But now that we can do that as designers with no code and still create the same, if not a better result, that's obviously very powerful. But I think the angle that doesn't get touched on enough is for that primary use case, which is marketers, people who, need these marketing sites to build, their sales funnels or what have you. And really why I think these tools are powerful is because it means that they can actually execute at a lot faster. If you think of a role of a marketing officer within an in-house organization, if they want to put out a campaign, they have to firstly go to the designers, then they have to go to the developers, the copywriters, and they've got all these different people that they have to talk to get their ideas to happen. But with tools like Framer or no-code technology, they can actually start to develop these things themselves. Again, back to my earlier point where the knowledge in your head and the strategy that you have up here is so much more valuable than you moving a cursor on the screen. So I think it's a really cool opportunity here. And also, here's an example of a client site that we did with Framer. Very beautiful in terms of animation and effects and content, everything was kind of really cool and well integrated here. Another really cool use case that we started to build too was Frameship, which was our Shopify and Framer integration. So trying to bring new use cases to tools like Framer, where, instead of, again, having to use a developer to build your Shopify e-commerce website, what if you as a designer could actually build e-commerce websites for Shopify using Framer? And this one was a pretty recent use case of a customer of ours who used one of our little plugins for Framer, which was super, super cool for me to see at the Australian Open tennis this year, where they actually built a whole sort of player onboarding flow for essentially they had a little gamified area and an experience where people could come in and play all these different video games. And they built this registration form and this virtual queuing form using Framer, which was super, super cool. And you could personalize your character, and then that would show on all their big TVs there. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you and why I think it's so important is design tools don't just have to be for design. A piece of paper doesn't have to be for writing or drawing. You could fold it into a paper airplane and it's got a completely different use case. Same things with design tools, right? They don't just have to be for design. You can fold them, you can play with them. It's a canvas, and you can turn that canvas into a lot of different use cases and possibilities. And I think Framer is a really great use case for that, where yes, you can build it for marketing sites, and that's kind of what it's intended to do. But if you start to play with it, start to flex it in a different way, just like Nandy was showing us before, you can actually create some really interesting things. So let's talk a little bit about Insert Frame. Obviously, you've heard a little bit about it over the course of the conference. It's my current company that we're up to. Now, Insert Frame is the company that we started, and essentially the goal of it is to build products and education for web designers. And that's what we do. We put on really cool stuff like this, and we create plugins and courses and all this really great stuff. Now, over time, essentially what we've started to do is like build out a team now for us. You see there's about 8 of us or so on the team now, and it's more than just me. And I really think this is like one of the core principles when it comes to like trying to build a creative startup. And that is, it's all about the people. I think it's very easy to become like ego driven or try to like essentially build an operation around you. But you start to realize as you scale that you need smarter people, better people, different people on the team to actually achieve this big mission that you're trying to go after. And that's where I found like trying to partner with other people, give them responsibility, give them ownership. Like, you know, I think that any creative on this conference here today probably can agree that they don't want to be managed. They want the creative freedom. And I think the thing that I've found with like hiring people is if you give them that creative freedom and the space to do that, they'll actually come back with some really excellent results. And I think at the end of the day, like it doesn't matter what you're building, people are the DNA. It's the people who are making these things possible. So if you can hero the people and really cherish them, then they're going to give you great value back in return. And then lastly, designers need to build more startups, right? You really do, because creative problem solving is in our DNA. Again, the example I'll use here is Brian Chesky, the founder of Airbnb, who actually has a background in, I believe it's architecture design. And he's one of the only designers on the Fortune 500 who actually has a design background. But like you look at Airbnb and what they're doing, and it's like super cool. And there's so many other like up and coming founders and people who are running companies who have this design background. And like there's just so much potential there. So my recommendation to you guys who are listening is to go out there, go build stuff, because that's what we're really great as creators. And hopefully you can find a little bit of traction and start to build your success. So my very last thing I'm going to say is to break the conga line, right? So essentially don't follow the crowd, do something different, be designers, be creative. And yeah, that's basically my talk. Hopefully you've taken a little bit of something away. I noticed the team behind me is here with a couple of questions. Happy to answer any questions at all, so feel free to write some things in the chat. But yeah, hope that was useful.
Hey guys. We thought we'd come in and ask.
Hey guys.
We'll start here. We thought we'd come in and we'd ask some questions on your behalf, because we've been in the back room for so long, and we just wanted to get on camera and say hi. Yeah, we just wanted to get involved.
So we'll do some quick intros first. So this is Georgia and Gus. Do you want to give a quick like intro about what you do?
Sure thing. Hey everyone, I'm Augustine. You can call me Gus. It's easier. I'm from Argentina, but I live in Melbourne now. And I started working with Ryan and Georgia a bit more than a year ago.
Just a bit,
yeah,
over a year.
This is actually my second front row working with them. Yeah.
I'll go now. So I'm technically head of operations here at Insert Frame, but we also wear every hat under the sun. And I also come from a background in design. So I studied design, and I did that for 3 years, and now I use it in my workflows every day. But again, it's helped me to do what I do, but I don't use it all day, every day.
Very good. All right. What questions we got?
So one of the questions I had for you was, if I wanted to start a career in design today, what would you recommend? Like, what should I do?
That's a good question. I think it's different for everyone. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think probably the easiest way is to try not to over invest too early. I think one of those things with design is, we get out of university and we just decide to, we get out of high school and we decide to go to university because that's the thing we're kind of meant to do, right? And I think the thing that we're meant to do is a really dangerous space. So I think if you can kind of like take a step back and go, okay, there might be another way to like learn this, then I think that could be potentially a better option. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily default to the thing you're meant to do, but actually take a look back and go, okay, I learn in this way. I prefer this sort of thing. And because I think like especially when you're early in the industry, what you initially gravitate to, that might change over time. So I think having the flexibility to change, I think is going to be really important.
That's a really good answer. Question.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I have to go and ask you something just as good. I saw a lot of people were asking in the chat, why did you choose Framer to base a business off of? Because there are other tools. You've done lots of other things in design. What made you choose Framer?
Sure. So like I mentioned, I think Framer is a bit of a canvas, right? It's just not for building websites. And I think if you fold it in a certain type of way, you actually create different use cases. And I think the great thing about Framer, obviously it feels like very powerful for designers and it feels very intuitive for designers. But in particular, if you fold it in a right way, you can create different use cases. And as a creator and as a builder myself, like I like trying to create new use cases. And I think Framer is that sort of like playground that lets me do that.
Speaking of Framer, you've built this startup based on Framer.
Yeah.
What was the most challenging part?
Definitely early on, where we started to see a little bit of growth and a little bit of traction and trying to manage that traction, because it almost went from 0 to 100 very, very quickly. And that's hard to keep up with, when you've got all these new customers in and you're trying to like keep up with them, but there's still problems with the product. So your reputation of customer support gets completely degraded very quickly. So you're trying to like do all these things and then you go, okay, there's so much work. I need to hire people, but then you need the time to hire people as well as do the things that are already on your plate, as well as work on things that, you need to work on to take you to that next level. So there's always this weird stage with startups, like as you grow and you start to see the success.
Succinct success.
Yeah. That you kind of get a bit stuck and a little bit frazzled. So I think just, in that moment, you just need to kind of like take a step back and go, you know what, it's going to be okay. We'll work through it just day by day. But yeah, that's definitely one of the challenges.
Yeah. I'm having flashbacks right now. Okay.
Go for it.
No, you go.
Now, I was going to say that we all obviously here, we love Framer.
Yes.
What other tools do you use, like your day-to-day life, in your workflow?
Most of my day-to-day at the moment really evolves around like comms and like managing the team. So that is Discord and Slack. Mm-hmm. So I think some people might be surprised to hear that we use Discord for communication over Slack. I mean, we do use Slack for some things, mostly like external things for dealing with clients and things like that. But internally we use Discord, which is actually a really, really great alternative. And then Notion as well for everything sort of like project management and operations.
Everybody's talking about AI at the moment. It's the biggest conversation.
Sure.
So in a world of AI, how do you keep products feeling, natural and having a human-like...
Feeling original.
Feeling original. Yeah. It's kind of what you talked about with Duolingo.
Yeah, like I mentioned, it's kind of like bringing your own Duolingo or your own Clippy to whatever you're building and actually giving it personality. Like what we're doing right now is giving personality to our brands, right? Like, there's faces here. We're actually being involved. It's not just some AI generated person here. It's actually us at, a ridiculous time in the morning. So I think just trying to be more human, being more authentic and trying to, do things that robots or AI can't replace and doing that more, I think it's just going to be net positive.
Okay.